These are the bizarre cults and the wild conspiracy theories tied to them, starting off with the Ant Hill Kids. In 1977, Roch Thériault convinced a small group of people in Canada that he had divine knowledge of an impending apocalypse. With charisma and a deep understanding of religious texts, he presented himself as a prophet chosen to guide his followers to salvation. Vulnerable and searching for purpose, his followers clung to his promises. Those involved were soon to find themselves in a nightmare that would leave scars, both physical and psychological, on everyone involved. The group called themselves the Ant Hill Kids, reflecting the relentless labor Thériault demanded of them as they built a remote commune in the wilderness of Burnt River, Ontario. Isolated from society, the group became entirely dependent on Thériault for guidance and survival. This isolation served as a powerful tool, allowing Thériault to impose his will with little fear of interference. Thériault's teachings mixed religious fervor with apocalyptic warnings. He preached that society was corrupt and doomed, and only through complete submission to his authority could his followers survive the coming end. This belief justified increasingly extreme practices that blurred the line between faith and terror. One of the most horrifying aspects of the Ant Hill Kids was Thériault's obsession with control. He enforced loyalty through brutal punishments, framing them as spiritual purification. Members were beaten, humiliated, and forced into painful rituals for minor infractions, or simply to demonstrate their devotion. He controlled their diets, marriages, and even their ability to speak freely. Thériault's most infamous acts involved his self-proclaimed role as a healer. Believing he had divine powers, he performed crude surgeries on his followers to cure illnesses or punish perceived disobedience. These so-called surgeries were carried out without medical training or proper tools, causing immense suffering. In one case, he attempted to treat a follower's stomach pain by making an incision with a knife, removing part of her intestines and stitching her up with a needle and thread. She died shortly after, but Thériault rationalized her death as part of God's will. Children born into the group fared no better. They were often subjected to neglect, harsh punishments, and a lack of proper care. At least one child died due to the group's living conditions and Thériault's negligence. His followers, caught in a web of fear and manipulation, were unable to resist or protect themselves or their children. The turning point came in 1989 when Gabrielle Lavallee, one of Thériault's long-suffering followers, managed to escape. She had endured years of abuse, including the traumatic loss of her arm, during one of Thériault's punishments, but found the strength to report him to the authorities. Her testimony exposed the horrors of the commune, leading to Thériault's arrest and life imprisonment. What made the Ant Hill Kids so horrifying wasn't just the violence, but the psychological control Thériault maintained over his followers. He exploited their faith and fears, turning their genuine desire for salvation into a tool of dominance. His story is a chilling reminder of how belief, when placed in the wrong hands, can become a weapon of unimaginable cruelty. As you consider this story, safely removed from its horrors, it raises unsettling questions about human behavior. What drives people to follow someone so blindly? How can faith, a source of hope for so many, become a trap? And most importantly, how can we recognize the warning signs before trust turns into submission? The Beasts of Satan, Bestie de Satana. Picture this: a small, quiet town in northern Italy, where life hums along in the way small towns often do. But beneath this ordinary surface, a shadow formed, a group of young people drawn together by heavy metal music, rebellion, and something far darker. They called themselves the Beasts of Satan, and their story would go on to shock a nation, leaving behind unanswered questions about belief, power, and the terrifying extremes of human behavior. The Beasts of Satan emerged in the 1990s, a group of young adults united not just by their love for heavy metal, but by a shared fascination with Satanism. At first glance, they seemed like a clique of outsiders, bound by music and their rejection of societal norms. But what set them apart wasn't their music or rebellion. It was their chilling belief that through satanic rituals and sacrifices, they could secure supernatural powers and dominate the music industry. Their actions weren't mere fantasy. Between 1998 and 2004, the group carried out a string of murders that investigators would later describe as ritualistic and deeply disturbing. One of their earliest and most infamous crimes was the killing of Chiara Marino and Fabio Tollis in 1998. Chiara, just 19 years old, was a self-proclaimed witch bride of Satan, while Fabio, a fellow heavy metal enthusiast, was simply a close friend to several members. Lured into a wooded area under the pretense of a casual outing, the two were brutally stabbed to death during what the group considered a satanic ritual. Their bodies were buried in a shallow grave, where they remained undiscovered for years. At the time, their disappearance was dismissed as another case of runaway teens, a tragic but unremarkable story. Fabio's father, however, refused to give up, tirelessly searching for answers and refusing to accept the official narrative. His persistence eventually led to the truth, but only after another horrific crime brought the beasts of Satan to light. In 2004, Andrea Volpe, a leading figure in the cult, was arrested following the murder of his own girlfriend, Mariangela Pezzotta. This crime unraveled the group's dark secrets. Under pressure from investigators, Volpe confessed to his involvement in multiple murders, including the deaths of Chiara and Fabio 6 years earlier. His testimony painted a chilling picture. The group believed their crimes were acts of devotion to Satan, essential sacrifices to maintain their pact and secure their rise to power. Drugs and alcohol played a significant role in their rituals, heightening the group's delusions and strengthening their belief that their actions were guided by supernatural forces. Diaries and personal writings found during the investigation revealed a twisted ideology that mixed Satanism, heavy metal culture, and a terrifying commitment to violence. Authorities eventually connected the group to at least 3 murders and other attempted killings. The trials that followed captivated Italy, with chilling details emerging about the cult's inner workings. Members described how they were manipulated and controlled, driven by fear and a shared delusion that their actions had cosmic significance. But why did they do it? Was it the allure of rebellion? The intoxicating promise of power? Or was it something deeper, a need to belong, twisted into something deadly? The truth is likely a combination of these factors, but the full answer may never be known. Even today, the beasts of Satan remain a haunting example of how belief can spiral out of control. Their story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the human mind and the dangers of unchecked obsession. It's unsettling, isn't it? To think that such darkness could exist within a group of ordinary young people, hidden behind the guise of friendship and shared interests. And perhaps that's the scariest part of all. In the end, the cult didn't achieve their goal of controlling the music industry or gaining supernatural powers. Instead, they left a legacy of pain, loss, and unanswered questions, a reminder of the thin line between fantasy and reality, and how easily it can be crossed. As you lie in bed, safe and warm, it's worth reflecting. What forces do we give power to in our lives, and where might they lead if left unchecked? The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. In 1989, a group of former Catholic clergy and laypeople in Uganda formed the Movement for the Restoration of the 10 Commandments of God. Led by Credonia Muarinde, Joseph Kibwetere, and others, the group claimed to have received divine visions warning of an impending apocalypse. They alleged that the Catholic Church had hidden the true 10 Commandments, and only through the movement could God's authentic message be revealed. This claim gave the movement a unique appeal, particularly among devout Catholics who were disillusioned with the mainstream church. The leaders insisted on strict adherence to their interpretation of the 10 Commandments, going so far as to prohibit almost all forms of communication to avoid lies or deceit. Silence became a virtue, and followers were instructed to speak only when absolutely necessary. At first glance, the movement seemed like a group of devout believers striving for a purer form of worship. but beneath the surface was a web of manipulation, fear, and ultimately, unspeakable violence. The leaders convinced their followers that the world would end on January 1st, 2000, and that only the faithful would survive. Members were required to sell their possessions, give all their money to the movement, and dedicate themselves entirely to its teachings. Many followers abandoned their families and livelihoods, believing they were preparing for salvation. However, as the prophesied date approached, cracks in the leadership's narrative began to show. When January 1st, 2000 passed without incident, the leaders claimed they had miscalculated and set a new date. This delay led to growing doubts among followers, and the movement's leaders began to fear dissent. What followed was one of the most horrifying acts in cult history. On March 17, 2000, over 500 followers gathered in the group's church to prepare for the revised apocalypse. The leaders told them they would soon ascend to heaven and instructed them to engage in prayer and fasting. Suddenly, the church was locked from the outside, and the building was set on fire. The flames consumed everyone inside. The fire was initially believed to be a tragic accident, but further investigations revealed a far darker truth. Authorities discovered multiple mass graves on the movement's properties, containing the bodies of followers who had been murdered in the days and weeks leading up to the fire. Some were poisoned, others strangled, and some showed signs of blunt force trauma. The total death toll is estimated to be over 900, making it one of the deadliest cult-related incidents in modern history. The leaders had orchestrated these killings to silence dissenters and maintain control, disguising the murders as part of their apocalyptic prophecy. Credonia Morinda, believed to be the mastermind behind the massacre, vanished and was never apprehended. The motivations behind these crimes were rooted in fear and greed. The leaders had amassed significant wealth from their followers, and likely feared exposure once their prophecies failed. Rather than face the collapse of their authority, they chose to eliminate anyone who might threaten their power or credibility. The movement for the restoration of the 10 Commandments of God is a chilling example of how faith can be weaponized. The leaders exploited their followers' trust, twisting their devotion into a tool for personal gain and control. The group's tragic end serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of blind faith and unchecked power. As you reflect on this story, consider how easily fear and desperation can make people vulnerable to manipulation. The line between faith and fanaticism can blur when trust is placed in the wrong hands, leaving devastation in its wake. The Sacred Mushroom Cult. In the lush mountains of Oaxaca, Mexico, the 20th century saw the rise of a mysterious group known as the Sacred Mushroom Cult. Rooted in the ancient traditions of Mazatec shamanism, the cult combined indigenous practices with a radical new belief that hallucinogenic mushrooms weren't merely tools for spiritual enlightenment, but keys to open portals for communication with extraterrestrial beings. These beings, the cult claimed, were guiding humanity's evolution and held secrets to the future of civilization. The cult's practices centered around psilocybe mushrooms, known locally as Teonanacatl, or flesh of the gods. These mushrooms had been used for centuries by indigenous shamans in sacred rituals to access divine realms. However, the sacred mushroom cult took this tradition in a new and startling direction, blending ancient spirituality with modern fascination with UFOs and cosmic mysteries. The group's leader, a charismatic and enigmatic figure known as El Profeta, claimed to have encountered extraterrestrials during a powerful mushroom-induced vision. According to his account, the beings, whom he described as luminous entities of pure energy, revealed that mushrooms were a biological conduit for interstellar communication. These beings, he said, had seeded the Earth with these fungi, as a way to guide humanity through pivotal moments in its history. Under El Profeta's leadership, the cult grew, attracting a mix of locals and curious outsiders, including spiritual seekers, researchers, and conspiracy enthusiasts. Members participated in elaborate rituals involving the ingestion of mushrooms in dark, secluded caves. These ceremonies were accompanied by chanting, drumming, and the burning of copal incense, designed to heighten the sensory experience and prepare participants for contact with the star beings. The cult's teachings grew increasingly elaborate. El Profeta claimed the extraterrestrials had a plan for humanity's evolution, but warned that a great cosmic reckoning was coming. To prepare, he instructed members to align their lives with the extraterrestrial guidance received during their visions. This often included cryptic instructions to abandon material pursuits, sever ties with skeptics, and, in some cases, relocate to remote communes where they could live in harmony with what they believed to be the being's directives. While the cult's core belief in extraterrestrial communication seemed benign, darker elements emerged. El Profeta became increasingly authoritarian, demanding total loyalty from his followers. Those who questioned his teachings or failed to experience the visions he promised were ostracized or subjected to harsh purification rituals. In the late 1970s, authorities began investigating the cult, following reports of missing persons and accusations of coercion. A former member claimed that El Profeta manipulated vulnerable individuals, especially those seeking spiritual healing or coping with personal tragedies. Some were said to have been pressured into relinquishing their possessions and cutting ties with their families, ensuring their complete dependence on the group. The most chilling allegations involved the cult's belief in sacrificial offerings to appease the star beings. While details remain murky, rumors persist that the cult's rituals may have involved not only animals but, in at least one instance, a human sacrifice. Authorities uncovered evidence of secret ceremonies deep in the caves, including ceremonial altars and traces of blood. In 1981, the cult's activities came to a dramatic end when police raided their main compound near Huautla de Jimenez. El Profeta and several high-ranking members were arrested, while many followers scattered into the surrounding mountains. The raid uncovered large quantities of psilocybin mushrooms, ceremonial tools, and manuscripts detailing the cult's beliefs and rituals. Despite the dismantling of the cult, its legacy lingers. Some of its teachings have been absorbed into modern psychedelic spirituality, while conspiracy theorists speculate that the cult may have uncovered genuine extraterrestrial secrets. The caves where their rituals took place remain a point of fascination for adventurers and paranormal enthusiasts who hope to uncover remnants of their enigmatic practices. The story of the sacred mushroom cult is both a cautionary tale and a reflection of humanity's ceaseless quest for meaning beyond the stars. It raises profound questions. What drives people to seek answers in altered states of consciousness? How do charismatic leaders turn curiosity into control? And what truths, if any, might lie hidden in the folds of such strange beliefs? While the cult's extraterrestrial claims remain unproven, those who peer too deeply into the void, the answers they find, or believe they find, can sometimes consume them. UFO. The Aetherius Society. In 1955, a former British taxi driver named George King declared he had received an extraordinary message. One day, while meditating in his small London apartment, he claimed to hear a voice, clear and commanding, instructing him, "Prepare yourself. You are to become the voice of the Interplanetary Parliament." This moment marked the birth of the Aetherius Society, a spiritual movement that blended UFO phenomena, Eastern mysticism, and apocalyptic prophecy. King described himself as the chosen channel for cosmic masters, advanced extraterrestrial beings who, according to him, had been observing and guiding humanity for centuries. These beings, he said, hailed from planets like Venus and Mars and had transcended physical form, existing as pure consciousness. The Aetherius Society's mission was, and still is, ambitious. Its followers believe they are humanity's spiritual first responders, tasked with preparing Earth for a future global transformation. According to the Society, our planet is in the throes of a spiritual crisis, one that could culminate in an apocalyptic event. But the cosmic masters have a plan to save us, if humanity can rise above its selfish tendencies and align with higher cosmic vibrations. Central to the Society's practices are spiritual energy batteries, which they claim store and direct positive energy collected during rituals and meditations. These batteries, according to King, can be used to prevent disasters, heal the Earth, and protect humanity from negative forces. One of their most famous rituals is the Operation Prayer Power, where members chant and meditate to charge these batteries with positive energy, later released to avert global crises. But here's where the conspiracy element takes hold. The Aetherius Society alleges that world governments and institutions are deliberately suppressing knowledge of the cosmic masters to maintain control over humanity. They believe powerful entities, both human and non-human, are working to keep humanity in a state of spiritual ignorance, preventing us from achieving enlightenment and averting the coming apocalypse. The Society also claims that historical figures like Jesus, Buddha, and Krishna were earlier manifestations of cosmic masters sent to guide humanity. This belief ties their extraterrestrial narrative to established spiritual traditions, giving their message a universal appeal. Over the years, skeptics have dismissed the Aetherius Society as a quirky UFO cult, pointing to the lack of verifiable evidence for their claims. But the Society is far from the sensationalist groups often associated with UFO conspiracies. They're not about doomsday bunkers or mass gatherings. Instead, they emphasize service to humanity, spiritual discipline, and global harmony. Despite this, some of their claims raise eyebrows. For example, the Society alleges that their prayers and rituals have directly prevented nuclear disasters and natural catastrophes. In one instance, they credited their spiritual efforts with averting a volcanic eruption in Iceland. While these claims remain unprovable, they reflect the group's deep belief in the tangible power of their spiritual work. Today, the Aetherius Society operates worldwide, with members participating in regular meditations, energy work, and lectures on cosmic wisdom. They remain firm in their belief that extraterrestrial intervention is not only real, but essential to humanity's survival. Whether you see them as visionaries or eccentric believers, the Aetherius Society stands as a unique blend of UFO mythology and spiritual devotion. Their story raises intriguing questions. What draws people to such extraordinary ideas? Is it hope, a search for meaning, or a genuine belief in something greater than ourselves? Whatever the answer, one thing is certain. The Aetherius Society isn't just gazing at the stars. They believe they're following instructions from them. The Children of Thunder. In the early 2000s, a small but deadly cult emerged in California under the leadership of Glenn Helzer. This group, known as the Children of Thunder, would leave a trail of manipulation, murder, and delusion in its wake. Helzer, a former stockbroker and self-proclaimed prophet, believed he was chosen by divine forces to purge the weak from society and usher in a utopian era where he would reign supreme. His vision for this new age involved shocking acts of violence and exploitation, all carried out in the name of his so-called mission. Helzer's ideology combined self-help rhetoric with a warped interpretation of Christian theology. He believed that by eliminating those he deemed weak or corrupt, he could hasten the arrival of a divine kingdom on earth. To accomplish this, Helzer recruited his younger brother, Justin Helzer, and a loyal follower named Dawn Godman, molding them into accomplices in his grand plan. Helzer's schemes were as complex as they were horrifying. To fund his vision, he devised a plot to extort money from unsuspecting victims. His first targets were Annette and Ivan Steinemann, a retired couple who trusted Glenn as their former stockbroker. The Helzer brothers and Godman lured the Steinemanns into their home under false pretenses, forcing them to write checks amounting to $100,000. After securing the money, they murdered the couple, dismembered their bodies, and disposed of them in weighted duffel bags in the Sacramento River. But Helzer's crimes didn't stop there. To cover their tracks, the group murdered Selena Bishop, the daughter of musician Elvin Bishop, who had unknowingly acted as a go-between to cash the stolen checks. In their desperation to eliminate all potential witnesses, they also killed two of Selena's friends, Jennifer Villerin and James Gamble, who had no direct involvement in the scheme, but were viewed as loose ends. The murders were brutal and calculated, designed to instill fear and ensure silence. Helzer's justification for these acts was rooted in his belief that the ends justified the means. He saw himself as a savior figure, willing to commit atrocities to achieve a higher purpose. His followers, deeply under his control, participated in the crimes out of loyalty and fear. What drove Glenn Helzer to such extremes? His background offers some clues. Raised in a strict Mormon household, he was excommunicated from the church after a series of personal failures and erratic behavior. This rejection fueled a deep-seated resentment and a desire to create his own spiritual path, one that placed him at the center of power. His charismatic and manipulative personality allowed him to exploit the vulnerabilities of those around him, drawing them into his delusional vision. The group's downfall came when investigators connected them to the disposal of the Steinemann's bodies. Evidence found in the river, along with testimonies from those who had interacted with the group, led to their arrest. During the trial, the sheer brutality and senselessness of the murders shocked the nation. Glenn Helzer was sentenced to death, while Justin Helzer received the same sentence but later took his own life in prison. Dawn Godman, who cooperated with authorities, received a lighter sentence, but remained behind bars for her role in the crimes. The Children of Thunder serves as a chilling reminder of how easily ideology can become a weapon in the hands of a manipulative leader. Glenn Helzer's belief in his divine mission justified unspeakable acts, turning his followers into accomplices and his victims into casualties of his delusion. As you reflect on this story, consider how the desire for purpose and belonging can make people vulnerable to dangerous ideologies. The line between belief and fanaticism is a fragile one, and when crossed, it can lead to devastating consequences. The Church of the Lamb of God. In the 1970s, a radical splinter group emerged from the Mormon fundamentalist movement, its name both benign and ominous, the Church of the Lamb of God. Led by Ervil LeBaron, a charismatic and ruthless figure, the group operated more as a criminal enterprise than a religious organization. LeBaron's theology revolved around his claim of divine revelations, which he used to justify a campaign of murder against his perceived enemies. These enemies, according to him, were agents of Satan infiltrating rival Mormon sects, and their deaths were part of a holy mission. LeBaron's path to infamy began within a polygamous Mormon offshoot founded by his father. Initially, Ervil worked alongside his brother Joel, who led the sect. However, tensions escalated when Ervil began to challenge Joel's leadership, asserting that he, not Joel, was the true prophet. This power struggle fractured the group, leading Ervil to form the Church of the Lamb of God. His teaching centered on apocalyptic visions and the belief that rival leaders needed to be eliminated to prepare for the second coming of Christ. One of LeBaron's most chilling doctrines was his interpretation of the blood atonement, an obscure concept in early Mormon theology that he twisted into a justification for murder. LeBaron claimed that those who opposed him were beyond redemption, and that their blood had to be spilled to save their souls and cleanse the earth of their sins. This belief led to the assassination of Joel LeBaron in 1972, orchestrated by Ervil and carried out by his loyal followers. Joel's murder was only the beginning. Over the next decade, LeBaron compiled what he called a hit list of rivals, defectors, and even family members who questioned his authority. His followers, indoctrinated through fear and fervent belief, carried out these killings with unwavering loyalty. The most infamous of these crimes was the 1977 murder of Dr. Rulon C. Allred, leader of a rival polygamous sect. Allred, a peaceful and widely respected figure in the fundamentalist Mormon community, was gunned down in his office by two of LeBaron's followers, acting on his direct orders. The assassination sent shockwaves through the community and drew national attention to the group. LeBaron's reign of terror extended beyond spiritual rivals. His control over his followers was absolute, maintained through psychological manipulation, threats, and violence. He used fear to ensure obedience, convincing his followers that disobedience would result in eternal damnation. Families were torn apart as LeBaron ordered executions within his own ranks, targeting anyone who showed signs of dissent or weakness. One of the most horrifying aspects of LeBaron's leadership was the role of his Book of the New Covenant, a manifesto detailing his commands, including a list of people marked for death. This document served as both a religious text and a kill order, binding his followers to his violent vision. LeBaron's criminal empire began to unravel in the late 1970s, when law enforcement agencies intensified their efforts to bring him to justice. He was eventually arrested in Mexico and extradited to the United States, where he was convicted of ordering Allred's murder. Sentenced to life in prison, LeBaron continued to exert influence from his cell, reportedly orchestrating murders even while incarcerated. Ervil LeBaron died in 1981, but his legacy of violence lived on. His death did not mark the end of the killings. His teachings had already set in motion a cycle of violence that continued for years. In a chilling epilogue, members of his group carried out murders well into the 1980s, guided by his hit list and the fear instilled by his doctrine. The Church of the Lamb of God stands as a stark example of how religious belief, when manipulated by a charismatic and authoritarian leader, can devolve into a vehicle for terror. LeBaron's ability to blend theology with personal vendettas created a toxic mix of faith and fear, turning ordinary people into assassins convinced they were doing God's work. Reflecting on this story, one is left to grapple with unsettling questions. How does an individual like LeBaron convince others to commit such atrocities? What makes people susceptible to such control, and how can communities recognize and prevent such extremism before it takes root? The tale of the Church of the Lamb of God reminds us that the line between faith and fanaticism is perilously thin, and when crossed, it can lead to devastating consequences. The Church of the Final Judgment, the process. In 1966, a couple named Robert and Mary Ann de Grimston founded a group they called the Process Church of the Final Judgment. What started as a quirky offshoot of Scientology quickly evolved into something far darker. Based in the UK but with a growing global following, the group blended apocalyptic Christian theology with occult practices. Their beliefs centered around the idea that humanity's fate would be decided by a battle between four deities: Jehovah, Lucifer, Satan, and Christ. Uniquely, the process taught that worshipping these opposing forces in harmony could bring about salvation or destruction. The group became infamous not just for their unsettling ideology, but for their sleek, almost glamorous presence. Members dressed in black cloaks, wore silver crosses, and presented an enigmatic, cult-like image. They preached that the end times were near, and that chaos and violence were necessary to cleanse the world and prepare for the arrival of a new Messiah. Here's where the conspiracy element takes root. By the late 1960s, rumors began circulating that the process had ties to Charles Manson. Some claimed that Manson's infamous helter-skelter ideology, a belief in an apocalyptic race war, was influenced by the group's teachings. The connection wasn't entirely baseless. Manson was known to have read the process's publications, which often glamorized violence as a purifying force. This alleged link gained traction after the process was implicated in the trial of the Manson family murders. Witnesses claimed that members of the process had visited Manson during his time in California, discussing their shared belief in chaos as a means of transformation. The group's leaders denied any formal connection, but the shadow of these allegations lingered for decades. The process also came under scrutiny for other disturbing activities. Members were rumored to have conducted bizarre rituals involving animal sacrifices, though the group always maintained these were symbolic acts, not literal. Their publications, filled with apocalyptic imagery and cryptic language, didn't help their reputation. Some of their essays seemed to celebrate destruction and suffering as necessary steps toward enlightenment. Despite their eerie aura, the process wasn't a large group. At its peak, it had only a few hundred followers, but their influence far outweighed their numbers, thanks to their provocative teachings and the widespread fear of cults during the 1960s and 70s. By the mid-1970s, internal conflicts and public pressure caused the process to unravel. The de Grimstons split, and the group fragmented into smaller sects. Some members abandoned the apocalyptic rhetoric altogether, rebranding as a charity focused on animal welfare. But the chilling legacy of the process remained, fueled by their alleged ties to Manson and their disturbing vision of a world transformed through chaos. So, were they truly orchestrating global chaos, or were they just another eccentric cult caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? It's hard to say. What's certain is that their story taps into deep fears about the power of belief and the thin line between faith and fanaticism. And whether or not they worked with Manson, their ideology reminds us how dangerous ideas can become when wrapped in the promise of salvation, at any cost. The San La Muerte Cult. In the shadows of South America's vibrant culture lies a secretive and controversial belief system centered on San La Muerte, or Saint Death. Unlike its more widely known counterpart Santa Muerte, the veneration of San La Muerte is often cloaked in whispers, fear, and alleged criminal ties. This cult, still active today, has become intertwined with one of the most dangerous industries in the world: the drug trade. San La Muerte, depicted as a skeletal figure holding a scythe or staff, is said to grant favors to those who show unwavering devotion. Followers believe the saint possesses immense power, capable of granting protection, wealth, and even vengeance, but here's the catch. San La Muerte demands loyalty and offerings, often in the form of ritualistic acts. The conspiracy element surrounding this cult is deeply tied to its alleged connections with South American cartels. It's said that cartel members use San La Muerte rituals to shield themselves from law enforcement, curse their enemies, and ensure safe passage for drug shipments. These rituals reportedly involve everything from chanting and burning candles to more sinister practices, including blood offerings. One of the cult's most infamous practices is the use of effigies or small statues of San La Muerte, which are fed with offerings like alcohol, tobacco, or even human hair. Some rituals involve burying these statues near law enforcement offices or along drug routes, believing the saint's energy will obscure their illegal activities from detection. The horrors attributed to the San La Muerte cult extend beyond the rituals. Authorities have uncovered evidence linking some followers to gruesome acts meant to secure the saint's favor. For instance, in 2013, investigators in Paraguay found an altar to San La Muerte surrounded by human remains. The site was linked to a local gang that reportedly performed sacrifices to protect their drug operations. These stories fuel the cult's terrifying reputation. But what drives people to such extremes? For many, life in cartel-controlled regions offers few options. Poverty, corruption, and violence are constant threats, and belief in San La Muerte offers a sense of power and control in an otherwise chaotic world. To these followers, invoking the saint isn't just about faith, it's a survival strategy. Despite its dark associations, the San La Muerte cult isn't universally tied to crime. Some devotees see the saint as a protector and healer, praying for personal safety or the well-being of their loved ones. This duality adds to the intrigue, as San La Muerte straddles the line between veneration and fear. Law enforcement agencies across South America are aware of the cult's influence, especially in regions where drug trafficking dominates. But the clandestine nature of San La Muerte worship makes it difficult to separate fact from legend. Is the cult truly a tool for manipulating law enforcement and securing drug routes? Or is it simply a reflection of desperation in a world where survival often means making unthinkable choices? Whatever the truth, the San La Muerte cult reminds us of the lengths people will go to when faith, fear, and power collide. And somewhere in the shadows, those skeletal effigies continue to watch, their hollow eyes witnessing a world where morality bends to the weight of survival. The Strangites. After Joseph Smith's death, the founder of Mormonism, his followers faced a big question: who would lead them next? While most sided with Brigham Young, one man, James Strang, had a different idea. He claimed to be the rightful successor and even said he had proof: a letter from Smith himself and, more importantly, golden plates he'd discovered buried in the ground. These plates, Strang said, were etched with divine instructions that only he could translate. They supposedly revealed a plan to create a holy kingdom and overthrow corrupt governments. A small but loyal group believed him and followed him, rejecting Young's leadership. Strang led his followers to Beaver Island, Michigan, a remote place where they could build their own community. Once settled, things took an unusual turn. Strang declared himself King of Beaver Island in an elaborate ceremony, complete with a crown and royal robes. This wasn't just symbolic. He expected his followers to treat him like actual royalty. Life under Strang's rule was strict. He reintroduced polygamy, claiming it was divinely inspired, and enforced harsh punishments for anyone who challenged him. Public humiliation and forced labor were common for those who stepped out of line. But Strang wasn't just interested in religious power. He wanted political control too. The Strangites clashed constantly with neighboring communities. Locals accused them of stealing, extortion, and trying to dominate the region. Tensions escalated as Strang's followers became more aggressive in enforcing his rules. But the real trouble came from within. Strang's strict leadership and growing paranoia alienated even his closest supporters. In 1856, 2 of his followers turned on him. They ambushed him at the dock, shooting him in front of everyone. Strang was badly wounded and taken off the island, where he died a few weeks later. With Strang gone, the Strangites fell apart almost overnight. Angry locals, who had long resented the group, drove the remaining members off Beaver Island. Their dream of a holy kingdom was over. The Strangites' story is one of faith, ambition, and the dangers of unchecked power. Strang's ability to convince people to follow him, even declaring himself a king, shows the pull of a charismatic leader. His followers truly believed they were part of a divine plan. But what makes someone believe in golden plates and a self-proclaimed king? Is it hope for a better future or a desire to belong to something bigger? The Strangites leave us wondering about the power of belief and how far people will go to defend it even when it leads to their downfall. The Shadow Serpents. In the slums of Brazil during the 1980s and 1990s, a secretive group emerged, weaving together fear, mysticism, and brutal power. Known as the Shadow Serpents, this cult blurred the line between gang and religious order. At the heart of their identity was an unnerving conspiracy. They claimed their voodoo rituals could turn their enemies into zombie-like slaves, bending them to their will. The Shadow Serpents were more than a drug cartel. They were a force of myth and terror. Their leader, an enigmatic figure known only as O Cobra, the snake, wielded an iron grip over his followers. O Cobra claimed to be a high priest of ancient voodoo practices, channeling dark energies to ensure the group's dominance in the drug trade. According to rumors, he would conduct elaborate rituals involving snakes, blood offerings, and rhythmic drumming deep in the forests of Brazil. These rituals were said to imbue the Shadow Serpents with supernatural powers, including the ability to curse enemies or even strip them of free will. Captured rivals or dissenters were reportedly subjected to these terrifying ceremonies. Witnesses described how victims were forced to drink potions made from hallucinogenic plants, mixed with venom and other unknown substances. Afterward, they would enter a trance-like state, reduced to docile, zombie-like shells of their former selves. The cult's leaders used these zombies to do their bidding, whether that meant working as drug mules, assassins, or informants. Stories of these rituals spread quickly, creating a climate of fear that made defying the Shadow Serpent seem unthinkable. But the cult's crimes didn't end with their supernatural claims. The Shadow Serpents were ruthless in their quest for power, violently eliminating rivals and enforcing their dominance over entire neighborhoods. Their signature mark was a coiled snake painted on walls or carved into the flesh of their victims, a chilling message that resistance would not be tolerated. One of their most infamous acts was the so-called Night of the Crawling Serpents, when several prominent rivals disappeared in a single night. Days later, these men resurfaced, wandering the streets in an unresponsive, trance-like state. Locals whispered that they had been cursed by the Shadow Serpents, their minds enslaved through O Cobra's dark magic. As their power grew, so did their paranoia. O Cobra reportedly believed their success depended on maintaining favor with the spirits. This led to increasingly elaborate rituals, some involving human sacrifices. These practices eventually drew the attention of Brazilian authorities, who began a relentless pursuit of the group. The Shadow Serpents' reign ended abruptly in the late 1990s, when a police raid uncovered their hidden compound deep in the Amazon. What investigators found shocked even the most seasoned officers. Altars adorned with snakeskins and human bones, vats of strange potions, and a group of individuals who seemed barely conscious, staring blankly into the distance. O Cobra was never captured, vanishing into the jungle before authorities arrived. To this day, his whereabouts remain unknown, fueling speculation that he may still be alive, continuing his dark work in secret. The Shadow Serpent's legacy lingers, a chilling blend of myth and reality. Were their claims of voodoo mind control true, or were they simply skilled manipulators who exploited local superstitions to maintain power? Either way, their story serves as a haunting reminder of how belief and fear can be weaponized to create absolute control. And as the jungle reclaims their ritual sites, the legend of the Shadow Serpents grows, an unsettling tale whispered among those who remember the reign of the cult that claimed to command both drugs and the undead. The Omoto Sect Japan in the late 19th century was a time of rapid change, modernization, and a growing sense of national identity. It was in this atmosphere that a woman named Nao Deguchi claimed to have received divine revelations. She said that the deity Ushitora no Konjin had spoken to her, delivering messages of purification and renewal. This marked the birth of the Omoto Sect in 1892, a religious movement that blended traditional Shinto beliefs with mysticism and apocalyptic visions. At its core, Omoto was about creating a spiritual utopia. Followers believed humanity was in a state of moral decay, and that only through spiritual awakening could society be purified. This wasn't just about individual enlightenment, though. The sect had a far grander vision, reshaping the world entirely. Nao Deguchi's successor, Onisaburo Deguchi, took this vision to new heights. He was charismatic, ambitious, and full of ideas. Under his leadership, the Omoto Sect expanded rapidly, attracting thousands of followers. Onisaburo introduced rituals, writings, and teachings that emphasized humanity's connection to divine forces. He also added a unique twist, a belief that the sect had a divine mission to challenge the political and spiritual status quo. Here's where things get interesting. The Omoto Sect's teachings included a prophecy of a new world order, one where earthly governments would be replaced by divine authority. According to rumors, this wasn't just an abstract idea. Some claimed the sect was actively plotting to summon a mystical army through elaborate rituals. This army, they believed, would overthrow the Emperor of Japan and establish a utopia guided by divine will. The Japanese government, already wary of new religious movements, didn't take these rumors lightly. In the 1920s, authorities cracked down on the Omoto Sect, accusing them of promoting dangerous ideas and plotting rebellion. Temples were destroyed, sacred texts were confiscated, and leaders, including Onisaburo, were arrested. But what were these alleged mystical rituals? Some accounts describe gatherings where followers would chant, meditate, and perform symbolic acts meant to channel divine power. Others talk about elaborate ceremonies involving sacred objects, believed to serve as conduits for summoning spiritual forces. While these rituals might sound fantastical, they were rooted in the sect's belief in humanity's ability to align with cosmic energies. The government's actions only fueled the sect's mystique. Despite the crackdowns, Omoto survived and adapted. It's worth noting that the sect's teachings never explicitly called for violence. The claims about summoning armies and overthrowing the emperor were largely based on outside interpretations and government paranoia. Still, the idea of a spiritual movement challenging the established order was enough to make the authorities nervous. By the mid-20th century, the Omoto Sect had shifted its focus. It moved away from its apocalyptic visions and toward a message of peace and universal harmony. Today, it's a much quieter movement, emphasizing art, cultural exchange, and spiritual growth. But the stories of its early years, of divine revelations, mystical rituals, and ambitions to reshape the world, linger on. Whether or not the Omoto Sect ever truly intended to summon a divine army, their story highlights something deeper. It's about the power of belief, the fear it can inspire in those who hold authority, and the lengths people will go to when they think they're fulfilling a divine mission. Even now, their history raises questions about the fine line between faith and rebellion, and how easily one can become the other. The Raëlian Movement. Imagine being told that every aspect of human history, our religions, our myths, even our very existence, was orchestrated by aliens. That's the core belief of the Raëlian Movement, a group founded in 1974 by a French racing journalist named Claude Raëlian, later known as Raël. According to Raël, his life changed forever during a routine trip in the French countryside. He claimed that a spacecraft descended before him and outstepped an extraterrestrial being who introduced itself as Yahweh, a member of an advanced alien race called the Elohim. Over several encounters, Raël said these beings revealed the true history of humanity. We weren't created by a god, but through genetic engineering performed by the Elohim. Every religious prophet, Jesus, Buddha, was supposedly sent by the Elohim to guide humanity. Raël was chosen as their latest messenger, tasked with preparing the world for the Elohim's return. And they wouldn't come empty-handed. Their arrival would mark the beginning of a new era of peace, enlightenment, and technological advancement. But there was a catch. The Elohim would only return if humanity built an embassy to welcome them. The Raëlian Movement's central mission, therefore, became securing land and funding for this embassy. Raël envisioned it as a grand structure with specific dimensions, complete with a helipad for spacecraft. While skeptics dismissed this as fantastical, the Raëlians saw it as a practical necessity for reuniting with their creators. This idea is only the tip of the iceberg. The movement's beliefs extend into nearly every aspect of life. They promote free love, gender equality, and scientific advancement, often embracing ideas that challenge traditional norms. Raëlians are vocal advocates of human cloning, which they see as the key to immortality, a technology they claim the Elohim already possess. But like many controversial movements, the Raëlians have faced accusations and conspiracy theories of their own. Critics argue that the movement exploits followers for financial gain, especially given the emphasis on funding the embassy. Others point to the group's sensational claims, such as their announcement in 2002 that they had successfully cloned a human child, as evidence of deliberate publicity stunts. While no evidence ever substantiated the cloning claim, it certainly brought the movement into the global spotlight. The Raëlian movement also has a history of pushing boundaries. Their advocacy for sexual liberation and provocative public demonstrations, such as campaigns promoting topless equality, have drawn both admiration and criticism. They argue that these actions align with the Elohim's vision of a free and enlightened humanity, unshackled by societal taboos. Despite their controversial image, the Raëlians maintain a dedicated following. They hold annual gatherings where members meditate, discuss philosophy, and celebrate their shared mission. The movement claims to have tens of thousands of members worldwide, though exact numbers are difficult to verify. At its heart, the Raëlian movement raises questions about the intersection of science, religion, and humanity's place in the universe. Is their story a brilliant allegory for breaking free from traditional dogma, or a fantastical narrative crafted to inspire hope or control? Whatever your take, the Raëlians continue to march toward their vision of the future. And who knows? In their eyes, the Elohim could be watching, waiting for humanity to take that next step toward the stars. The Heaven's Fire Cult. In the 1980s, amidst a wave of political unrest and societal change in Japan, a fringe group emerged with a fiery mission. Known as the Heaven's Fire Cult, this secretive organization was led by a man who referred to himself as Master Enkai, a name derived from the Japanese word for fire. Enkai claimed to have received visions from celestial beings, warning him that government leaders and other prominent figures were possessed by fire demons intent on corrupting society. His solution? Purify the world through literal fire. Enkai's ideology blended apocalyptic prophecy with supernatural elements, framing his actions as a divine mandate to save humanity. He preached that only through acts of destruction could the fire demons be driven out, restoring purity and balance. To his followers, many of whom were disillusioned with societal norms or grappling with personal struggles, this doctrine offered purpose and a sense of righteousness. The cult's operations were shrouded in secrecy, recruiting members who were required to renounce their former lives and dedicate themselves fully to the cause. Initiation rituals often involved exposure to fire, walking barefoot across hot coals or standing near flames for prolonged periods, symbolizing their commitment to the purifying force they worshipped. The group's campaign of terror began with small arson attacks on government buildings and private businesses, which they claimed were hubs of demonic activity. Initially dismissed as acts of vandalism, these incidents escalated in both scale and intensity. The cult targeted facilities they associated with power and corruption, including political offices, corporate headquarters, and even schools they believed were indoctrinating children with demonic influence. One of the most horrifying attacks occurred in 1987, when members set fire to a crowded train station during rush hour. The blaze spread rapidly, killing 36 people and injuring over 100. The cult later justified the attack in a public manifesto, claiming the station was a gateway of darkness that allowed the fire demons to spread their influence. These acts were not random. Enkai carefully orchestrated the attacks, using fear and manipulation to maintain control over his followers. He convinced them that their sacrifices, including the loss of their own lives if necessary, were essential to achieving divine redemption. Many members participated in the attacks with a mix of fear, loyalty, and fervent belief in their leader's apocalyptic vision. Investigations into the Heaven's Fire Cult were hampered by the group's secretive nature and the sheer unpredictability of their attacks. However, a breakthrough came when a disillusioned member fled the group and provided authorities with critical information about their operations and Enkai's true identity. This defector described the intense psychological conditioning members endured, including isolation from family, physical punishments, and constant reinforcement of their belief in Enkai's divine authority. Armed with this information, law enforcement launched a coordinated raid on the cult's compound in 1989. The operation uncovered stockpiles of incendiary materials, detailed plans for future attacks, and evidence of internal punishments for members who defied Enkai's orders. Enkai and several high-ranking members were arrested, and the cult was effectively dismantled. During his trial, Enkai remained unrepentant, claiming he was a divine messenger, misunderstood by mortal authorities. He was convicted of multiple charges, including murder and terrorism, and sentenced to death. The Heaven's Fire Cult's legacy is one of devastation and unanswered questions. How did Enkai convince so many to follow him into such extreme acts of violence? What vulnerabilities in society allowed his ideology to take root? And perhaps most chillingly, could a similar group rise again, cloaked in a new guise but driven by the same destructive zeal? The story of the Heaven's Fire Cult is a reminder of how fear and belief can be weaponized. It challenges us to remain vigilant, questioning not only the ideologies we encounter, but also the motivations of those who seek to lead. As much as we hope such horrors remain in the past, their lessons are timeless. The Brotherhood of the Cross and Star. The Brotherhood of the Cross and Star began as a seemingly peaceful religious movement. Established by Olumba Obu, the group proclaimed itself as a Christian sect focused on divine teachings, spiritual purity, and the restoration of humanity's connection with God. However, beneath this veneer of holiness lay darker accusations, claims that the Brotherhood was involved in secretive rituals designed to influence elections and secure power for its followers. Olumba Olumba Obu presented himself as a messianic figure, often referred to as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords by his devotees. His teachings combined elements of Christianity with unique spiritual practices, emphasizing his role as the divine vessel of God. Members of the Brotherhood were required to follow strict rules, including abstaining from meat, alcohol, and traditional medicine. Publicly, the group appeared to promote peace, unity, and personal discipline. However, whispers of clandestine activities began to emerge as the group expanded its influence across Nigeria. Critics accused the Brotherhood of conducting secret rituals aimed at manipulating political outcomes. These rituals were said to involve chanting, symbolic sacrifices, and the invocation of spiritual forces. The goal? To sway elections, control local leadership, and place loyalists in key positions of power. The accusations weren't entirely unfounded. Over the years, several political candidates with ties to the Brotherhood gained prominence in Nigerian politics. While the group publicly denied any political ambitions, many saw its growing influence as a coordinated effort to shape the nation's future from behind the scenes. The most controversial claims surrounded the Brotherhood's alleged use of spiritual warfare. Reports from former members described ceremonies held under the cover of night, where participants would chant prayers, burn incense, and present offerings to secure divine intervention in political matters. These rituals were rumored to include symbolic acts, such as the burying of objects believed to spiritually bind opponents, rendering them powerless in elections or government decisions. Beyond politics, the Brotherhood faced scrutiny for its internal practices. Members were expected to show unwavering loyalty to Olumba Olumba Obu and his successors. Dissenters or those who questioned the group's teachings often reported being ostracized or subjected to spiritual punishments designed to invoke fear and compliance. One of the group's most notorious controversies occurred in the 1980s when several local elections were marred by accusations of voter manipulation tied to the Brotherhood. Political rivals claimed their campaigns were sabotaged through both conventional and spiritual means. These allegations, though never proven, further solidified the group's reputation as a shadowy force operating behind the political curtain. Despite these claims, the Brotherhood of the Cross and Star maintains a significant following. Its members view the accusations as slander aimed at discrediting a misunderstood religious movement. They argue that the group's teachings focus on love, charity, and spiritual enlightenment, not political machinations. Yet the duality of the Brotherhood's public image and the persistent rumors of secretive rituals continue to raise questions. Was the Brotherhood a misunderstood spiritual movement unfairly targeted by critics, or was it a well-organized network subtly reshaping Nigeria's political landscape? As the group persists into the modern era, its legacy remains clouded by both devotion and suspicion. Whether their influence was achieved through faith or manipulation, the Brotherhood of the Cross and Star stands as a testament to how spiritual authority can intertwine with political ambition, creating a powerful and polarizing force in society. The Order, Silent Brotherhood. In the early 1980s, amidst the economic turmoil and shifting political landscapes of the United States, a group emerged with a chilling mission. Known as the Order, or the Silent Brotherhood, this organization was not a typical extremist group. They had a grand vision: to overthrow the US government and establish a white supremacist state through an underground network of armed compounds. Founded in 1983 by Robert J. Matthews, the Order drew its inspiration from the dystopian novel The Turner Diaries, a book that outlined a fictional white nationalist uprising. Matthews, a disillusioned former tax protester, believed the novel wasn't just a story. It was a blueprint for action. With fiery rhetoric and an unwavering belief in his cause, he recruited a core group of followers who shared his ideology. The group's goals were as ambitious as they were terrifying. They planned to fund their revolution through a campaign of theft, fraud, and violence. Over the next 2 years, the Order would execute a series of crimes that sent shockwaves across the nation. Their first major act was a string of armed robberies targeting banks and armored cars. These heists were meticulously planned, often executed with military precision. The largest of these was a brazen theft in 1984, where they stole $3.6 million from a Brinks armored truck in California, a massive sum at the time. The money was intended to finance their growing network of compounds, weapons stockpiles, and propaganda efforts. But theft wasn't the extent of the Order's crimes. They believed that striking fear into their enemies was essential to their revolution. In 1984, the group assassinated Alan Berg, a prominent Jewish talk show host in Denver, Colorado. Berg had been a vocal critic of white supremacist ideologies, and his murder was seen as a message to others who opposed their views. The killing, carried out in a hail of gunfire, marked the Order as one of the most dangerous extremist groups in the country. The conspiracy element driving the Order was their belief in the eventual collapse of the US government. They envisioned a series of coordinated attacks that would destabilize the nation, leading to anarchy. In this chaos, they planned to rise, using their network of compounds to establish a new, racially pure state. They called this vision the Northwest Territorial Imperative, imagining a homeland for white supremacists in the Pacific Northwest. Their underground network was designed to be self-sufficient and impenetrable, with bunkers, stockpiled weapons, and secret communication channels. They even minted their own currency, called Aryan Nations Silver, as a step toward creating their independent economy. However, their ambitions were ultimately their undoing. As their crimes escalated, so did the attention of federal authorities. By 1984, the FBI had launched an intense investigation into the Order. Using informants and undercover agents, they tracked the group's movements and began dismantling their network. The final confrontation came in December 1984, when federal agents cornered Robert J. Matthews on Whidbey Island, Washington. Matthews refused to surrender, leading to a dramatic standoff. After hours of gunfire, the house where Matthews was holed up was set ablaze, and he perished in the flames. The death of their leader marked the end of the Order, but their influence lingered. Many of their members were captured and convicted, yet the group's ideas continued to inspire other extremist movements in the years that followed. The story of the Order serves as a stark reminder of how dangerous a combination of ideology, organization, and violence can be. They weren't just a fringe group. They were a calculated, well-armed force with a clear plan for upheaval. Their legacy isn't just about the crimes they committed, it's about the lingering threat of extremism that takes root when hatred is weaponized and conspiracy becomes the foundation for action. While the Order itself,